My family tried to push me aside, so I took control and left them speechless with my success. My dad's hand landed on the back of my chair like he was about to shove it in for me. Except I was already sitting, and the gesture wasn't help, it was positioning. He leaned down behind my ear, breath smelling like red wine and the espresso he'd knocked back at the bar, and murmured, "Scoot over a bit, yeah? We need space here for Luke and Sienna. This is their night." His fingers pressed lightly, guiding me an inch to the side like I was a centerpiece he could move to make the photo look nicer. Across the table, my brother Luke was grinning at someone's joke, already in full host mode. My mom was smoothing her napkin like she was smoothing the mood, eyes flicking around the private dining room to make sure every detail looked expensive enough to justify the price. I could hear the low hum of conversations from the main restaurant outside the sliding door, the soft clink of cutlery, the whisper of a waiter's shoes on polished floorboards. The air smelled like garlic butter and charred rosemary. My cheeks were warm, not from the wine, from the familiar sting of being quietly rearranged. I swallowed and smiled on autopilot, because that's what I've done my whole life. Make it easy, make it smooth, don't be the reason the vibe changes. But my jaw was tight, and I could feel it in the hinge near my ears, that dull ache that comes from clenching for too long. Mum's friend Lorraine, who always manages to look like she's judging everyone's posture, leaned across and said, too brightly, "There you are. We weren't sure you'd make it." Luke's fiancée, Sienna, gave me a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, like she didn't know what category to file me under yet. My Aunt Diane laughed and said, "Well, you know how she is," like my existence came with a disclaimer. Then Dad lifted his glass and tapped it with a fork, and that sharp ting cut straight through my ribs. Everyone turned. Cameras came up. Luke stood half out of his chair, already ready to be applauded for breathing. And Dad said, all right, quick speech. We're celebrating Luke and Sienna tonight, and it's all thanks to family. The people who show up, the people who make things happen." His eyes flicked to me for half a second, just long enough for the message to land, then slid away. "Some of us," he added, smiling like it was a compliment, "are really good at being behind the scenes." It was a Tuesday in late March when I realized my family didn't just prefer me behind the scenes. They needed me there. They needed someone to do the unglamorous work while they stood in the spotlight, and called it togetherness. I've been playing that role since I was a kid. The one who remembered birthdays. The one who packed extra chairs into the booth. The one who booked the restaurants and chased RSVPs and made sure Nana had a ride. The one who fixed Dad's printer, updated Mum's phone, handled Luke's quick favors that turned into half my weekend. And when I started doing well, not just surviving, their first instinct wasn't pride. It was adjustment. Like, okay, if she's successful now, how do we position her success so it still benefits us and doesn't threaten the story? For context, my family runs a small event catering business. Think weddings, corporate lunches, christenings, anything that needs platters and pretty food and a smiling family-owned vibe. My parents built it from scratch, and I'll give them that. They worked hard. They were the kind of people who could charm a room and talk their way into opportunities. But behind the charm was chaos. Every invoice was late. Every supplier relationship was held together by Dad's confidence and Mum's ability to guilt people into just one more week. When I was in uni, I started helping temporarily. I made spreadsheets. I created templates. I built a system for ordering so we didn't buy 30 kilos of chicken when we needed 10. I did it because I liked it, and because I couldn't stand watching them drown. And because, stupidly, I thought if I became essential, I'd finally be appreciated. Luke was never essential. Luke was visible. There's a difference. Luke could show up an hour late to his setup, flirt with the bridesmaids, carry one tray, and Mum would beam like he'd personally rebuilt the venue. Luke could handle clients because he had the smooth gene. Dad loved taking him to meetings. Loved saying, "This is my son. He's going to take over one day." Meanwhile, I'd be in the kitchen at 5 a.m. Hair in a bun, hands smelling like onions, printing the run sheet, packing the van, double-checking allergies, fixing the roster, calming down staff who hadn't been paid on time because Dad forgot payroll again. If Luke was the face of the business, I was the spine. Nobody takes photos of spine. They just notice when it breaks. The first time I tried to step forward was at a wedding showcase. We had a stall, branded tablecloth, sample platters, a slideshow playing on a TV. I designed the whole thing, down to the pricing cards. A bride-to-be asked a question about logistics, delivery windows, staff numbers, contingency plans. Luke opened his mouth to answer, and I jumped in because I actually knew. I started explaining calmly, clearly, and the bride's shoulders relaxed because she could hear competence. Dad cut me off mid-sentence with a laugh and said, "She's our operations girl. She worries about details. Luke's the people person." The bride laughed politely. Luke smiled like a king. I stood there with my mouth half open, cheeks burning, and felt myself shrink back into the role they'd assigned me. Operations girl. Details. Behind the scenes. Don't threaten the narrative. That moment stuck in my throat for years. Fast forward, I moved out. Not dramatically, just quietly. I got a job in logistics because it matched what I was already doing for the family, except in an environment where people actually valued structure. I learned more in a year than I'd learned in 5 of being the helper at home. I got promoted. I started managing projects. I started negotiating contracts. I started earning money that didn't come with a side order of guilt. And for the first time, I noticed how my body felt when I wasn't bracing for my family's opinions all day. My shoulders dropped. I slept. I laughed without checking who was watching. I still helped them, though, because habits don't die just because you move suburbs. Mom would call and say, "Can you just check this quote? Dad thinks it's fine, but I'm not sure." Dad would text, "Quick question, what's GST on this?" Luke would message at 11 p.m. asking if I could fix a schedule because a staff member was threatening to quit. I'd do it because I didn't want the business to collapse and take my parents with it. I'd do it because Nana's pride in the family business was genuine and I didn't want her heart broken. I'd do it because some part of me still craved the fantasy that one day Mom would say, without prompting, "We couldn't do this without you." Instead, the closer I got to being truly competent, the more they tightened around me. The money shift happened slowly. It always does. The first time my parents asked for help with cash, it was framed as temporary. "Just a short gap," Dad said. "You know how clients are." I transferred a few hundred, then a few more. When I pushed back, Mom would say, "We've sacrificed so much for you. We never asked for anything," which was hilarious because they asked for everything, just dressed it up as family. Then I landed a big opportunity. Not lottery rich, not influencer rich, just stable, adult rich. A role in a growing company where I'd be running operations for multiple sites with a salary that meant I could breathe. I didn't tell my family right away. I told my best friend, and she screamed on speaker. I told my partner, and he hugged me so hard my ribs hurt. I stared at the offer letter like it might vanish. Then Mom found out through one of her friends who worked at the same company, and suddenly my phone was full of heart emojis and so proud, and we always knew. Always knew what? That I'd be useful? Within 2 weeks, their tone shifted. Dad started saying things like, "Well, now you're doing well. It's time you contribute properly." Luke started joking about me being the rich one. Mom started hinting about upgrading the business van, buying new equipment, investing in the family brand. I kept saying no gently. I offered to help them budget. I offered to streamline their invoicing. I offered to redesign their pricing so they weren't constantly underquoting. Every practical offer was ignored. They didn't want my skills. They wanted my money. And then came the dinner invite. Luke and Sienna's engagement dinner. At a winery restaurant with a private dining room and a photographer friend just capturing memories. Mom texted me. "It would mean a lot if you came. Family should be together," which is her way of saying, "We need you there for the optics." I came anyway, because Nana was coming, because I wanted to show up like an adult, because I thought maybe I could just sit, eat, smile, go home. Then Dad made the behind-the-scenes comment, and I felt something in me go very quiet and very clear. He wasn't just describing me. He was assigning me. In public. In front of Sienna's family, their friends, Mom's church crew. He was pinning the old label on me like a name tag. Useful, invisible, grateful. And here's the thing. I didn't become successful to prove them wrong. I became successful because I had to. because I didn't want to live in constant stress, because I was tired of being treated like the family's emergency generator, only noticed when the power went out. But I also wasn't going to sit there while Dad casually rewrote my role as supporting character in a story I'd built half the foundation for. So while everyone laughed politely at Dad behind the scenes line, I put my fork down. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips. I could feel the room's attention shift in that subtle way it does when a vibe might crack. Mom's eyes flicked to me, warning like, don't you dare. Dad raised his glass again. And I just want to say, he continued, Luke and Sienna are going to need support as they start their life. Weddings aren't cheap. Homes aren't cheap. Family steps up. He smiled, and I saw it, the setup, the soft launch of an expectation. A few heads turned toward me, like people already knew I was the designated stepper-upper. Luke smirked into his drink. Sienna's mother dabbed her mouth like she was watching something mildly uncomfortable, but not her problem. I took a breath and was about to say, actually, when a sliding door opened. A woman walked in wearing a blazer that looked like it cost more than my car. She had that brisk, purposeful energy of someone who doesn't enter rooms by accident. Behind her was a man in a neat shirt holding a bottle of wine, and a younger woman with a leather folder tucked under her arm. They looked slightly out of place among our family's semi-formal chaos. The hostess hovered near them, whispering, "This is the private room," and the woman in the blazer scanned the table, eyes landing on me like she'd found the person she came for. She smiled, not the fake polite smile Mom does, but the quick professional one, and said, "There you are. Sorry we're late. Parking here is a nightmare." My entire family froze. Mom blinked, mouth parting. Dad's smile faltered mid-lift. Luke's smirk slid off his face like it had never been real. The woman stepped closer and extended her hand to me. "I'm Karen," she said, loud enough for the table. "From Northbridge Conference Group. We spoke last week." I stood on pure reflex, chair scraping softly, and shook her hand. My palm was sweaty. "Yes, I managed." Karen glanced around the table, polite but not deferential. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. "Your email said your family would be here tonight, and it might be easier to say hello in person since we're in town. I wanted to congratulate you." Dad's eyebrows drew together. "Congratulate her for what?" he asked, and there was an edge in his voice, the edge he uses when he feels control slipping. Karen looked at him like he was background noise, then back at me. "For landing the contract," she said. "It's not every day someone comes in, audits 3 chaotic sites, redesigns the entire flow, and saves us 6 figures in waste and overtime within a quarter." Our board was impressed. The table went so quiet, I could hear the faint buzz of the restaurant speaker system outside. Luke laughed once, awkwardly. "Wait, what?" Karen continued, still smiling. "We're rolling your model out nationally next year," she said, "which is why I brought these." She nodded at the younger woman, who slid the leather folder onto the table, right in front of me. "Not Dad. Not Luke. Me. It's the updated proposal for the next phase. I wanted to make sure you were happy with the terms before we sign next week." Mom's hand fluttered to her chest like she was short of breath. Dad stared at the folder like it was an insult. And in that moment, I understood exactly what success looks like to my family. Not internal peace, not stability, not confidence. They only recognize it when it walks into the room wearing a blazer. Karen added, casually, like she was talking about the weather, "And I saw you were listed as the keynote speaker for the Operations Summit in July. Congratulations. Those slots are competitive." My Aunt Diane's eyes widened. Lorraine's mouth formed a perfect, silent O. Sienna looked at Luke with a tiny crease between her brows, like she was recalculating what she'd assumed about his family dynamic. Dad cleared his throat, forcing a laugh that sounded like it hurt. "Well," he said, "she's always been organized." Karen smiled politely. "Organized is an understatement," she said. "She's exceptional." I felt heat rush into my face, not from embarrassment, something else. Something like vindication mixed with grief, because it shouldn't take strangers to see me. Dad tried to regain control the only way he knows, by reframing me as an extension of him. "She got that from us," he said quickly. We run a catering business. Family business. She's always been behind the scenes helping. There was again. Behind the scenes. Reduce. Reassign. Keep the hierarchy intact. Karen tilted her head slightly. Oh, she said, polite curiosity. Do you work in operations as well? Dad's smile tightened. We're more client-facing, he said, which was his way of saying he didn't want to answer. Karen nodded like she'd heard that before. Then she turned back to me and said, Do you have a minute to step out and run through the timeline? I don't want to steal you from dinner, but since everyone's here. My family's favorite phrase when they want to pretend things are unified. I looked at Mom. She looked at me like she was watching a car crash she couldn't stop. Luke was staring at his plate. Dad's jaw was clenched so tight a tendon jumped near his ear. And this is where I took control. Not by gloating, not by embarrassing anyone with a big speech. I did it by choosing myself in real time, in front of them, without apologizing. I've got 10 minutes, I said to Karen, and my voice sounded steady. I'll be right back. Mom's eyes widened. Now, she whispered, like I'd asked to set the table on fire. Yes, I said quietly, still smiling. Now, I stepped out of the room with Karen and her team, and as soon as the sliding door closed behind us, my lungs finally grabbed a full breath. The corridor smelled like wine and detergent and something citrusy from the bathrooms. My hands were shaking slightly, and Karen didn't notice or didn't care. She was already flipping open the folder, pointing to sections, asking me about timelines, asking me questions like my brain mattered. It was normal to her. That's the part that got me. This wasn't a special favor. This was my life, my work, my earned credibility. When we finished, Karen shook my hand again. I'm really glad we could do this in person, she said. And seriously, congratulations. You've built something valuable. Built something. Not helped. Not supported. Built. I walked back into the private dining room with my shoulders a little straighter, my chest still tight, and the entire table snapped their attention onto me like I was suddenly a different species. Dad's face was flushed. Mom had been crying. Her eyes were shiny, mascara slightly smudged. Luke looked like he'd swallowed something sour. Sienna's mother was watching me with new interest. Lorraine was staring like she'd just discovered the difficult daughter storyline might have been incomplete. I sat down, calmly, and picked up my water glass. The ice clinked softly. My hand didn't shake now. Dad cleared his throat again. So, he said too loud, this summit thing, what's that about? I took a sip of water, let the cold settle my nerves, and said, It's a conference. I'm speaking about systems design in multi-site operations. Luke let out a breathy laugh. Since when are you doing all that? Since always, I wanted to say, since you were charming clients and calling it leadership. Instead, I said, for a while. Dad tried to smile. Well, good for you, he said, but it sounded like he was forcing the words through his teeth. We didn't know you were that involved. Mom dabbed at her eye and whispered, Why didn't you tell us? This is the part where I could have been petty, where I could have said, because you don't listen, or because you only care when it makes you look good. And that would have been true. But Nana was watching me from the end of the table, eyes tired but attentive. Sienna was there. This wasn't just about punishing my family. It was about reclaiming myself without becoming like them. So I told the truth, the clean version. I did tell you, I said softly, looking at Mom. I tried. You just filed it under her little thing. Mom's mouth trembled. Dad's eyes narrowed. Luke scoffed. That's not fair. I turned to him. Isn't it? I asked, still calm. You've called me behind the scenes like it's a compliment for years. You've treated my work like it doesn't count unless it's benefiting you. Dad snapped. We have supported you. I nodded once. You supported me when it was easy, I said, when it didn't challenge your story. The table went quiet again. Not the shocked quiet from Karen's entrance. The uncomfortable quiet of family truth sitting on the table like a dish no one asked for. And then Dad did what he always does when he feels exposed. He reached for money as a leash. Well, he said, voice stiff, since you're doing so well, you can help Luke and Sienna out, yeah? Weddings are expensive, and we've all contributed to you in the past. There it was. The real purpose of the dinner speech. The family steps up line. The folder was just missing this time, because Karen had accidentally walked in and stripped the script down to its bones. Luke's eyes flicked to me, hopeful and resentful at the same time. Mom stared at me like she was praying I'd fix the moment. Sienna looked uncomfortable, gaze dropping to her hands. I felt my heart thud once, heavy. The old reflex tried to rise, appease, smooth, pay, keep the peace. My throat tightened. Then Nana, bless her, spoke. Her voice was quiet, but sharp enough to cut. "Don't," she said to Dad. Dad blinked. "Mom." Nana lifted her chin. "Don't you dare," she repeated. "You've taken enough from her without even saying thank you." Mom made a small sound like she'd been slapped. Luke stared at Nana like he'd forgotten she had opinions. I swallowed hard because Nana saying it out loud made something in me wobble. Relief, grief, rage, all tangled. I set my glass down carefully and said, "I'm not paying for the wedding." Mom inhaled sharply. "But I'm not," I repeated, still calm. "I'm happy for you both. I'll give a gift like any guest. But I'm not funding it." Dad's face hardened. "So you're going to sit there with all that money and let your brother struggle?" Luke's jaw clenched. "It's not funding," he muttered. "It's help." I looked at Luke. "You don't want help," I said. "You want access." Luke's face flushed. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, voice steady, "you were fine with me being invisible until you realized I could be useful." Mom started crying properly now. Not delicate tears. Big ones. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Why are you making it ugly?" I almost laughed because it was so classic. They make it ugly for years in small, quiet ways, then call you cruel when you name it. "I'm not making it ugly," I said softly. "I'm just not pretending anymore." Dad leaned forward, eyes hard. "If you're going to act like this," he said, "don't expect to be part of this family the same way." The threat hung there. The old fear tried to grab me. Being cut off, being the black sheep again, being excluded from holidays and photos and stories. But Karen's words echoed in my head. "You built something valuable." And Nana's hand on mine earlier, whispering good. And my own body, finally learning what it feels like to stand upright. So I nodded once and said, "Okay." Dad blinked, thrown off. Mom's sob hitched. Luke's mouth opened like he wanted to say something cruel, but couldn't find the angle. Then I did the thing that truly left them speechless. Not the contract, not the blazer woman, not the keynote. The boundary. "I love Nana," I said, looking down the table. "I will show up for her. I will show up for events where I'm treated like a person, not an ATM or a prop. But I'm done being pushed aside until you need something." My voice shook slightly on the last word, and I hated that it betrayed how much I still cared. But I didn't take it back. Mom whispered, "So what? You're better than us now." I shook my head. "No," I said. "I'm just not smaller than you anymore." Luke stared at me like he didn't recognize me. Dad's face had gone stiff, like he'd been slapped by someone he thought was harmless. Sienna finally spoke, voice gentle but strained. "Maybe we should just enjoy dinner," she said, trying to rescue the night. Dad forced a laugh. Yes, of course." He lifted his glass again like he could tape the moment back together. But the room had shifted. They couldn't unsee it now. Someone important had walked in and treated me like the main person. Nana had spoken. I hadn't folded. The old hierarchy had cracked in front of guests. Dinner continued in a weird half-normal haze. People talked about the venue and the menu and Luke's proposal story, but the energy was off, like everyone was avoiding stepping on glass. Lorraine kept sneaking glances at me with a new kind of curiosity. My Aunt Diane was silent, which is never a good sign. She was storing this for later gossip. Mom kept dabbing her eyes and smiling too hard. Dad drank more. When it was time for photos, Dad tried to place me at the edge again. "Stand there," he said, pointing like I was furniture. I looked at him and said politely, "No," then I stepped next to Nana and put my arm around her shoulders. Dad froze, then muttered, "Fine," like he'd granted permission. The photographer snapped pictures. Luke smiled stiffly. Mom's grin looked painted on. Nana squeezed my hand. And for the first time in my life, I didn't angle my body to make myself smaller in the frame. After the dinner, Mom cornered me near the car park under the yellow spill of a streetlight. The night air was cool, smelling like damp grass and wine. Her voice was shaky. "You embarrassed your father," she said. I exhaled slowly. "He embarrassed himself," I said. She flinched. "You're so harsh." "I'm honest," I said, and my throat tightened again. "There's a difference." Mom looked up at me, eyes glossy. "We didn't know you were doing all of that," she whispered. "Why didn't you tell us properly?" I stared at her and felt that familiar sadness, wanting her to just get it, rise like nausea. Because every time I tried, I said, "You brushed it off," or compared it to Luke, or turned it into what I should be doing for the family instead. Her mouth trembled. "We're proud of you," she said, quickly, like she needed to say it before I left. I believe she believed it in her way, but her pride had conditions. "Being proud isn't the same as respecting me," I said quietly. "And I need respect." Behind her, Dad's voice called, "Are you coming?" Like he was already done with this conversation and wanted to drive home. Mom wiped her cheek. "So what now?" she asked. I looked at my car, then back at her. My hands were cold from adrenaline. My chest felt tight, but there was something steady underneath it now. "Now," I said, "I keep living my life. And you can decide if you want to be part of it without trying to control it." Mom stared at me like she couldn't tell if that was a threat or a boundary. In my family, they're the same thing. When you stop being controllable, they call it punishment. I got in my car and sat there for a minute with both hands on the steering wheel, breathing. My body was shaking a little, not from fear, more from the release of holding myself together for decades. I felt weirdly empty and weirdly free. The fallout came later, of course. Luke sent me a long message about how I always make everything about me. Dad didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. Mom sent guilt texts at 2 a.m. about family loyalty. Aunt Diane told relatives I'd changed. Lorraine told people she'd always believed in me, which made me laugh out loud in my kitchen. Sienna messaged me privately, awkwardly, saying she hoped we could start fresh, which I appreciated more than she probably realized. But here's the part where my success truly left them speechless. Not because it was flashy, but because it was independent. When Dad finally called again, it wasn't to apologize. It was to ask if I could just help with a supplier contract because you're good with that stuff. He said it like he was offering a compliment, like it was safe again because it put me back behind the scenes. And I said no. Dead silence on the line. "What do you mean no?" he snapped. I said, calm. "I'm not doing unpaid work for the business anymore. If you want to hire me as a consultant, my rate is," and I told him a number that was fair, not inflated, the number my time is actually worth. He exploded. Of course he did. Called me ungrateful. Said I'd forgotten my roots. Said family doesn't charge family. And I said, family doesn't dismiss family until they need something. He hung up on me. A month later, the catering business lost a big corporate client because they messed up timing and underdelivered. Mom tried to call me crying. I listened because I'm not cruel. Then I said, gently, "I can recommend someone, or I can consult if you want. But I'm not rescuing you for free." She went quiet. "So you really mean it?" she whispered. "Yes," I said. "I really mean it. That's what control looks like sometimes. Not revenge. Not a dramatic speech. Just consistency." 6 months after Luke's engagement dinner, I stood on a stage at the Operation Summit Karen had mentioned, mic in my hand, lights hot on my face, and spoke about building systems that don't rely on one exhausted person doing everything quietly. I talked about how hero culture burns people out. I didn't mention my family, but I felt them in the shape of my words. After the talk, people lined up to ask questions, to connect, to offer opportunities. I felt nervous and proud and terrified, and I did it anyway. Mom watched the live stream later. Someone sent her the link because of course they did, and she texted me a single line. Wow. Just that. No emojis. No guilt. No request. I stared at it for a long time, and I realized they were speechless because the success was undeniable, yes, but also because it came with something they weren't used to from me. Boundaries. A spine in the photo. A no that didn't wobble. A life that didn't collapse without their approval. They tried to push me aside like they always had. So I took control, not by becoming louder than them, but by becoming unmovable.